Hey, Trusty Herd. I'm Dr. Tim Thain, author of Not by Chance and the founder of Trusty, and this is the Not by Chance podcast. Here we spotlight the latest innovations in adolescent treatment and show families how to keep the momentum and build trust at home. You'll hear real success stories and proven ideas from experts and families. Why is being intentional so important? Because we know that your family's progress and happiness is not by chance. In today's episode, we'll be talking with Kristin Oliver from Wisconsin. As the mother of Addie, Kristin led her family through years of struggle and treatment and shares what helped ease her anxiety and boost her preparedness for Addie's return home. She has a generous heart for all parents that find themselves facing the uncertain but hope-filled future for their child after treatment. You're going to love her. Let's get started. All right, we're here with Kristin. We're so excited to have you here, Kristin. It was a few weeks ago, we had our pilot group of parents, and that's where I met you, and actually met you a little bit before that because you'd read Not by Chance, and we connected through, was it the Not by Chance Facebook group, I think?
Yes, yep.
And you were stellar in so many ways immediately. I think you were on your way to see your daughter at the time. And I could just tell you're just such an engaged mother in the process. And of course, you were getting close to the end of when your daughter was going to be coming home. And so if you're like me, as something important is looming and coming, I do get focused. I do get engaged. And you definitely did that. And it was just a joy to have you in our pilot group. And so as we're kicking off season 5, we promised everyone that we would have real parents here on the podcast, sharing their stories, things they'd learned through the process. Anything that they felt like was working, we want to amplify in this podcast. Innovations that are going on in the field. We're also going to be doing some interviews with professionals as well. So it's going to be, you're sort of a hybrid, I think, in my mind. And a lot of parents are, because through this process, the learning that happens for parents, they tend to become PhDs, in a lot of things. The diagnoses their child was given, what the treatment process is all about, what you can do in order to improve the outcomes. I mean, all of those things are going through the mind of a parent. So I'm so excited to have you here because you will be able to speak in a way and with such intimate knowledge of the subject matter, which is a parent going through this process with their child, that other parents will immediately connect and say, she gets me. So with that, Kristin, would you mind sort of just giving the audience a Reader's Digest condensed version of what was going on at home before you sought help for your daughter?
Yeah, Tim. When I think back to when the journey started, it's a little blurry, but I would say for about the past 3 years, really right after COVID, my 15-year-old daughter was having a hard time navigating social relationships and suffered from extensive bullying and peer rejection. And during that time, she turned to self-harm to cope with that emotional pain she was feeling, and tried ending her life multiple times.
Mm.
She was struggling with depression and anxiety and had recently been diagnosed with autism. We tried so many short-term treatment programs in our community, but nothing worked. Her defiance and behavior outbursts were impacting our family, our day-to-day living, and it just kept getting worse. She started using drugs and engaging in more risky behavior. My daughter was in such a downward spiral, I didn't know how to keep her safe anymore. And it was a really hard decision even think about treatment outside of the state. But I was so scared that if I didn't get her into treatment, she would end up in jail or dead.
Mm. Yeah, so that story, I'm just picturing myself as just another parent finding this podcast, hearing that story, and many of them, to those who haven't been through the trauma of what you just described, they look at that and say, that sounds like a story that not many people experience. but that's not true. Um, as I was, over the years, I've talked to a lot of families, and it seemed like things got worse over time. And stories like this with your daughter, and just how desperate it got to the point of multiple hospitalizations, suicide attempts. I mean, that is now, in my mind, a common part of a journey to finally, finding an out of home placement treatment program. And so, what was that like for you when you made that decision? I mean, you're kind of at that point where what else to do, right?
Yeah, it was really scary. But I knew that it was out of my hands, and I knew
Hmm.
nothing I was doing was making a difference. And I didn't want my daughter to end up in the criminal justice system. And our community didn't have the resources that we needed to kind of let her unplug and reform her identity and find that new
Hmm.
normal. There were too many distractions in society that existed. So, weighing the pros and cons of that, I looked online and searched hours and hours to try to find the right program for her, and faced many barriers, faced
Hmm.
barriers of insurance, faced barriers that they looked at my daughter's um, diagnoses on paper and said they couldn't manage the difficulty or the level of severity. So even thinking about long-term treatment was causing me stress and anxiety, because every door I opened felt like it slammed in my face.
Hmm.
And then I finally found the right fit out in Yak, Montana at Turning Winds, and interviewed so many parents, to try to make sure that I was making the right decision. But lo and behold, in June of 2024, I got her on a plane willingly, which
Mm.
most parents struggle with,
Right.
and was able to check her into treatment.
Great. So that's June of 2024. And how long was she there?
She was there 9 months.
Hmm. And over the course of that time, I'm sure there's some ebbs and flows and some growth and regression, and uh, probably on your part and her part, and all of that. But what are a couple things that you can think of back in that experience over that period of time that you would point to and say that really helped or that worked in this program?
I think first and foremost, actually, words from my daughter. For the first time when she got into this treatment facility, she felt like she was seen as a person and
Mm,
not a problem.
wow.
So the foundation of the treatment program at Turning Winds was to build a relationship and form a connection, which I know is near and dear to your heart, Tim, and not focus on the problem right away. So I think why long-term treatment works better for more complex cases is that it takes time to bring those walls down
Mm,
and build that relationship and form a
hmm.
foundation of trust. So they knew that progress wasn't probably going to be made in that first 90 days, and set us up to understand that.
What do you think was maybe a part of this particular treatment program's philosophy, their culture, or whatever it was that helped her feel seen and heard and as a real person? I mean, what was it?
They truly believed that they were like a second family. Their treatment model was more of a family system,
Mm,
and setting up that family system so that they could build those relationships and focus on building trust and find small wins before they started the hard work. And short term programs just don't have the flexibility to do that.
right. That's a really interesting difference that you're talking about there. That may take more time, and I'm sure there's 1,000 questions parents out there are thinking of right now, like how do we do this kind of thing. But um, I want to kind of fast forward a little bit, and I know that there's a lot of the story we're missing here, but let's fast forward to 2 or 3 months before discharge, and what was going on with you during that time as you contemplated the upcoming discharge of your daughter.
Well, a couple different things, Tim. In my unique scenario, I was actually moving houses, so I had to prep for that. And I was building a home in a brand new community. Um, but I was also counting on insurance to carry us through this kind of dynamic time that I was facing at home. And I'll never forget it. On 11/25, November 25th, I got an email from the admin coordinator that said insurance was no longer going to cover Addie's treatment.
Oh, wow.
Um, and I remember just like my breath being taken away and falling to the floor in the kitchen,
Mm,
because we hadn't even like broached the topic of transition planning.
wow.
So, and I had been in these scenarios before, and other facilities had literally just said, you have 72 hours to pick up your child.
Mm, mm-hmm.
So I couldn't imagine what that was going to be like, how I was going to get, all the way to Montana, so on and so forth. So I just started catastrophizing. Um, so that was kind of how like it got put in my lap. And then thankfully, I was able to work with the staff at Turning Winds and my insurance company and go through multiple levels of appeal during the Thanksgiving holiday
Mm,
and convince them that it was critical for her to at least step down in care and stay for a few more
mm.
months.
I want to
Um,
stop right there for a second, Kristin, because that's another thing I'm seeing a lot more often these days is these surprise discharge, like insurance is done. All of a sudden it's done. And I think you did a great job of I could visually see you, falling to the floor, losing the breath that you had, really at a complete loss because you'd already been through that trauma once or twice or however many times, but here you are again. Um, is there anything you would, I don't know if there's anything you could share with other parents because this is becoming a very common thing. What would you say to the parent that is in that situation or might be in that situation?
yeah, I think two things, Tim. I think the day you drop your kid off is the day you start transition planning,
Yeah.
because you can't wait. So whatever you need to do to change the home environment or, reflect on your own shortcomings or mistakes as a parent, they're starting their change journey the day you drop them off. So as hard as it may be, you have to figure out what that looks like for yourself.
Mm, great
And
advice.
yeah, and second, I would say really try to dig in and understand what the dynamics of your insurance company or financial situation is so that
Mm,
you can be as prepared as possible.
hmm. Wow, that sounds awesome. Because you're right. You should probably assume that the date will come faster than you think, and might come as a surprise. And so, what do you do so that you don't have an experience of being completely unprepared? So, that's a great piece of advice. And the navigating the insurance thing, I'm sure that's a nightmare. Really for families. Um, so here you were. All of a sudden, you're not sure how much time you have. You were able to get a little more time, right, with the insurance, the appeals that you did. But still, it was pretty quick turnaround, right? And
Yes.
faster than you expected.
Right. And it was the holiday season. So that was kind of also what I was catastrophizing about was how do I turn back on therapy? How do I turn back on a support system at home when people were out of office for, days and weeks at a time?
Right. Wow. Yeah. How do I set all that up uh, when she could be coming home in the middle of all this? So, what were some of the emotions you're going through during this time?
I think as I reflect back, Tim, I was questioning my own strength.
Mm,
She had been working and changing every day and learning new skills and in a supportive, captive environment to practice those. And
yeah.
I was still trying to balance life and do that reflection at the same time. So I was questioning my own strength and confidence
Mm,
and facing a lot of fear and anxiety, because I hadn't really worked through the trauma of what I had experienced, those 3 years leading up to a placement out of the home.
yes. And as you looked at this pending discharge, what do you think was missing in some of the transitional processes or planning processes of that program or others? Just programs in general. What do you think's missing? And this is kind of a big. I guess this is my real passion at the moment. Real kind of niche passion that the general state of transition planning across the board of adolescent treatment is not real great, and there's a few reasons for that. And I might just interject a couple of those right here. Is that treatment programs mostly focus because they have so many things they've got to do, and the therapist in particular is sort of that point person. The things that they have to do, it's like this, just this bulk of things. And the last thing is this transition planning process. And to be honest with you, I think most therapists probably understand that not a lot of these plans actually get implemented after treatment. And if I'm a therapist and I'm trying to decide what to do with my limited amount of time and the clients I'm working with and all the notes I need to take and the sessions I need to have and the meetings I got to go to, and I know this plan's important in theory, but in reality, I'm not sure those plans really last more than a week or so before they're sort of put on the shelf and they start to gather dust. I'd probably do the same thing that I see a lot of this process, how this process unfolds inside treatment programs, is that it becomes a little bit of a reactive experience because maybe the insurance suddenly says it's over. And so it's sort of, let's throw something together and let's check all the boxes. And I remember being a therapist in a program, and in our program, The Wilderness, and the discharge planning I did back then was horrible. I remember thinking about, all right, yeah, they need to have ongoing structure. Yes, they probably need therapy. Let's say family therapy too, not just individual, but family therapy too. There needs to be some academic support. You see how general this is that the way I'm talking, that was many years ago. But I just remember not realizing at the time, as I look back, how critical that was and how unhelpful it was. I don't know what your experience was like, but I think in general, that's what I see happening. Parents, since college, my passion has been to help families thrive. For decades after, my team and I delivered the premier in-home aftercare, but it could be costly, and too many families were left without support. That's why we created Trusty, a unique blend of proven curriculum, personalized coaching, and intuitive technology. Starting at just $129 a month, you can access tools and expertise to get and keep your family on track at a fraction of what we used to have to charge. Like we always say, help things go right before they can go wrong. Visit trusty.com, spelled with 2 Y's, to learn more and subscribe today.
Yeah, and I would say from the short-term programs that my daughter was in, the transition planning was very similar to what you just described, Tim. Very vague, kind of like CYA, nonetheless.
Yes. Right.
That's what it felt like when I walked out of those programs.
Yeah.
And I think that not adjusting the home environment or addressing the other half being the parental system through the whole process, especially in those short-term treatment programs, but even in the long-term treatment program, the clinician's focus is the child.
Yeah, that's right.
And if the parents don't have the energy, self-awareness, self-starterness to go out and figure out what support they need, then they're kind of left without that support. And I think that's so critical because, again, we're asking our child to make changes, but they're not the whole problem. It took 2 to get there. It took the parental unit, the environment, and the child to create that kind of storm that you may have been in, that storm of chaos. So if we just only address one half of that, how do we expect to have success when we bring them back into that home environment?
That's a really great outlook. And I think in general, parents are probably a little more aware of that fact than they were, let's say, 20 years ago when I started doing a lot of aftercare work. Is that, and programs were part to blame back then, and still a little bit can be. in that they do focus an awful lot on the teen, and by lack of supporting the parents in their growth journey too, sometimes I think they're almost unwittingly telling the parents, we're dealing with the important stuff. Hopefully you're getting your own help and you're out there doing something to prepare, but we're going to keep our focus over here, almost telling them this is the important half. And
Yep.
I tend to agree with you, is that, if a parent can kind of picture themselves at the door of discharge with confidence, like they are feeling confident at that point, what are some of the specific things you would say that they can do to feel confidence at that point?
I think that knowing they have a support system after treatment. So, as much as they focus on having a support system for their child, they need to also look kind of inward and say, what is my support system going to be? Because they can't go the journey alone. I think finding the support group, both through my treatment program and through the pilot group, Tim, was one of the big reasons that I was able to squash the fear and anxiety that I was feeling, because what I was going through was normalized. And I started to go
Mm-hmm.
through it with a community of people. So I didn't feel alone. And I think that feeling of isolation and loneliness, that you're the only one going through this, really is what makes that fear and anxiety rise. So find a support system.
Mm-hmm.
And I think early on, finding either a therapist or a parent coach, because you have to be able to look inward and look at that resume of failures and
Yeah.
have an honest conversation with yourself about how I need to show up differently. And I think then the third thing would be, you have to remember the growth that your child has experienced, because they're not the same version of your son or daughter that you sent to treatment. And if you start treating them that way, to me, that will cause regression.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, I've seen that in the past. And I think parents start doing that out of fear and anxiety.
Right.
So if they can squash some of that by getting their own support system, getting the coaching that they need, and find the tools that are going to help keep them consistent, then I think that's how you show up at the door of discharge with strength and confidence and find your parental authority.
Oh, I love that. So well said. I think about the spiraling that can happen without the confidence. So if they're not prepared, they come into it, like you said, with fear and doubt in themselves, and maybe not really able to see the gains made because of that fear and doubt. What they see is the little evidences of the same child that was here before, and I'm not ready for that.
Mm-hmm.
And so away we go, right? With the spiral of fear. The belief that you can't do it tends to come true, because you, instead of coming at it with positivity and confidence and real skills and applying true principles, you're kind of winging it, and you know it. And I think that that's what I'm getting from your experience is that you really dove in, and you did have confidence by the time that discharge happened. And what would you say you did as a result of the confidence after discharge that has, you feel like it's made a difference?
When I think about the things that are helping us kind of sustain that different home environment, um, a couple things come to mind. And it's letting go of trying to control the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
When I think about how I used to react, or how I would let my daughter's reaction affect my ability and my strength as a parent to hold a boundary or communicate a clear expectation, I was letting the emotional dysregulation drive my response and how I showed up as a parent. And that's because I was so focused on controlling that outcome.
Mm.
And
That's a
as I
par-
shift, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, Kristin. That's such a paradox, isn't it?
Yes.
That parents have to work through, because they've got all this anxiety around, we don't want to go back to the way we were. And that triggers in us a lot of times as parents the feeling that we have to control the outcome or control the details of what's going on and clamp down more, or maybe it's out of that they might do the opposite. But both cases, they're trying to control the outcome. I'm not going to address this issue because it'll trigger something bad, and so I don't want that outcome, so I'm going to not address the issue. Or the other way around, clamping down, and that's obvious control. But there's different ways you try to control the outcome if that's the driver underneath it. And both of them lead to this paradox of having less control of the outcome the more we worry about that, right?
Yes, and I think even as you think back to like the transition planning and the transition plan ownership, understanding how you have to flip the script on that and put your child in the driver's seat to really sustain the change. And seeing that, day after day with my daughter now being home 60 days, I think is just proof for the thoughts that you're having about how that needs to shift. And it is scary. It is super scary coming from a place of not knowing if my daughter was going to live or die, and feeling like I had to control it from a place of safety to now knowing that she's in a much different mental state and she can handle struggle, and that navigating, making her own choices and holding her accountable using choice-based language has been the difference that has allowed us to succeed these last 60 days.
That's something coming from you and all the trauma of trying to keep her safe all the way, before treatment, where you had to try and control that aspect so that she was safe. And then there's the trauma that goes with it, which, how did you overcome those triggers? Because I'm sure it hasn't been this nice, perfect, easy glide upward, but you had this principle in your mind, like, I can't try to control the outcome. How did you manage the triggers emotionally inside you based on trauma of the past when those moments would come up and since she's been home?
Before we got home, we talked a lot about giving each other grace and keeping the lines of communication open and using a strategy called a timeout. So what I have really practiced, and we've allowed grace for each other to practice, is when our thoughts are racing and we're not in control of our emotions, to hit that timeout button and slow things down. So by doing that and keeping that a consistent practice in our family, I feel like I've been able to manage my emotions and then come back to the conversation with a clear mind. And I think before treatment, I was letting my emotions drive how I was setting consequences, how I was talking to her, and I was expecting that to drive change. And it only drove her further away from me.
Yeah. How powerful is that? I mean, you're talking about a technique, but I would say that technique was possible because of a relationship you have with her. And I wonder, how would you rate the relationship you have now on a scale of 1 to 10, just in general, since she's been home, versus maybe prior times during treatment and prior to treatment? Where would you rate it now?
I would give it an 8 now. And I would say a healthy 8. We had a good relationship before treatment. I think that's why she was willing to get on the plane and let me take her there.
Yeah.
But it was out of codependency, and we were not holding healthy boundaries for each other. And I think me being able to work on that while she was gone and us having some separation for her to have wins on her own, we were able to come back to a much healthier relationship and healthier place where we're both able to hold boundaries for each other and not get as codependent or enmeshed in each other's problems.
Oh, I love the way you said that. Healthy 8. and you unpack that, and it basically means that you still high trust, and maybe even more trust, because now there's a a true parent leader that is also open to her daughter taking the reins more and more, and she's stepping up as that's happening. And I know that the journey is still unfolding, but what do you think are a couple things that you think you're going to hold on to and keep doing to going forward, and that are working, and you're going to keep it up?
Yes, and that's a great question. I think frequent check-ins, focusing on connection over correction. We're
Mm-hmm.
all human and mistakes are going to be made. But I truly believe if you can continue to keep a pulse on building trust and open lines of communication, really anything is possible. But when those two things start shutting down or degrading, that's, I think, when the downward spiral, if I had to look back, that's when the downward spiral started. So I think for me, that's really what I've been holding on to. And I also think leaning into parent support groups, leaning into the trustee herd and leveraging the tools in the app. I don't know how many times a day I use the AI feature just to get out of my own head, because I want to reinforce that I'm still on the right path. So
Yeah.
I think having that and having tools at the tips of my fingers, having a supportive community that I get to share successes and opportunities with, have been things that also help me stay consistent as a parent, because I know that I'm a part of a community. So those are kind of a couple key things that really help me keep going. And I think lastly, it's just every day is an opportunity. It is really hard to not be triggered by the things of the past. But if you let that control your decision making, you parent from a place of fear. And if you look at each day as an opportunity and that mistakes are going to be made and approach each day with grace, then I think we both win.
I don't know what kind of mother you were before, but I can tell you you're a phenomenal mom at this point. It's not just heart, but it's knowledge. It's really intentionality and how you're going about this. And how would you say your daughter's doing, pre-treatment to now?
I think she's doing great. Tim, I have seen the testing phase,
Yeah.
pop up every time, every a little bit. And I recognized the other day that there was something we were doing where we were holding on to that honeymoon phase a bit.
Yeah.
And we were able to challenge it in family therapy, but she's been faced with really tough decisions, um, and made smart choices that have allowed her to stay sober, and not relapse with drugs. She's been on a phased transition plan. So, like 30 days was very keeping her world small.
Yeah.
And now we're in that world is getting a little bit bigger. And the
Yeah.
conversations that we have about risk and the choices that she needs to make just feel very different than from a place of control where it used to come. Like, I'm going to control how much time you have on your first social media app by setting alarms versus, hey, how much time do you think is reasonable? And how do we monitor this together, and come up with a plan? So it just the conversations we're having feel very different.
Wow. So growth orienting and inviting her to step up into more maturity, more responsibility, and kind of own her life as she goes forward. All of those things are such great principles. Kristin, you have been amazing to share this story today. And I know you've given people hope. There's going to be parents who are at that phase you were at before you found, the right treatment situation for you and your daughter. And they're going to hear this and they're going to say, that is the light at the end of the tunnel. I know that this is a long journey, but for everybody to see you out here, and your daughter doing pretty darn well, that growth to keep going, and huge gift you've given everybody to be on the podcast today. So thank you so much for joining me on this. And thanks for just being a part of our early part of Trustee as well. It's awesome to have a parent like you, giving us great feedback on the app, doing so many things to contribute. So just on a personal note, thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Tim.
Well, thank you for sticking with me through this podcast. I don't think that was hard because Kristin was fantastic. She's the mother that any program would want to have, and she's someone who loves to participate and actually apply the things that she's learning. So it's been a joy to get to know her. And to wrap up, I want you to think about what will you do because of what you've heard today. I think in every episode, our goal is to bring to you some important information that you can actually act on. And also, if you're ready to start and be a founding member of Trusty, please sign up before the 15th, if possible. That's when we're going to be officially launching. And we've got, if not by then, we may still have a spot or two, but do it quickly because we're only keeping 50 of these spots at 50% off. And that's an incredible offer with a lot of value for very little money. And so please take advantage of that because we'd love to have you in the founding group of the Trusty Herd. Next week, I'll be hosting a longtime friend, a co-founder of TLOS, a residential program here in Utah, and the past president of the National Association for Therapeutic Schools and Programs, Mr. Tony Mosier. And I can't wait. We will hear from Tony's decades of experience as an innovator in teen treatment. He'll talk about what's been working and how parents can adopt some of those ideas that they've implemented in a treatment program back home again. I know you're going to want to have a notebook ready because he's always got a powerful, punchy way of talking about things that you don't forget. Join us next week, and we'll see you then.